We're doing a guest energy rant this week with Bryce Dvorak. We're going to be talking about grid interactive efficient buildings, something I wrote several blog posts on about a month ago, or the end of about a month ago. And so this kind of started off when we were doing an interview, basically an interview with the Smart Electric Power Alliance, talking about grid interactive buildings, and I invited Bryce to join us on that call. And Bryce was saying, "Well, geez, we don't know that much about grid interactive buildings." And then as part of that call, I'm like, "Holy cow, Bryce knows a crap load about grid interactive buildings." And we've done a fair amount of research actually when we added up. So I wanted to bring Bryce on and have a discussion on that. In fact, that was one of the first things that I wanted to do after that. So I'm a little bit late. I wrote the blogs, but we'll have the discussion now.
That's all right. We're getting around to it.
Yeah. So Bryce, I wanted to ask, in your mind, what do grid interactive buildings mean to you? It's defined by DOE and stuff, and what do you take it away?
Yeah. Well, to me, when I think of grid interactive buildings, I think about opportunity, and I think we'll get into that, a little bit as we continue talking. But as we're seeing, some pretty rapid changes to, the power industry, the power grid, rapid deployment of renewable energies, more intermittent resources. I mean, we're looking at more and more uncertainty about, our power generation in the future. When is power going to be available? And, in addition, we're seeing, changing loads on buildings. Well, where I think grid interactive buildings come in is that provides us an avenue or an opportunity or a framework, I guess, to align building consumption with power generation curves. Mm-hmm. And it really, grid interactive buildings can be something as simple as efficiency measures and demand response strategies to more automated control sequences, smart AI type controllers that look at all sorts of inputs from weather and building occupant comfort and pricing signals and make smart decisions on what to best curtail or adjust in a building to make its load match a desired outcome to as far as pricing or demand at any given time. Mm-hmm. And even on top of that, I think there's more and more challenges and opportunities with grid interactive buildings once you start layering in on-site generation, solar, storage, figuring out when to charge and discharge batteries, whether that's in the form of a dedicated battery or a bank of EV chargers and EVs that are plugged in. There's just a lot of things that go into these grid interactive buildings, and when I said opportunity, I mean I think there's opportunity to figure out all these challenges and really make our whole commercial building infrastructure more efficient and more well aligned and providing a value stream to the grid itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I read the DOE definition, and it includes, I think, everything that you said. Efficient, connected to the grid, controlled by occupants, smart. There's sensors and controls, and flexible, of course, like you said, with basically shifting and shaving energy loads during the day. So what's the status of, to your knowledge, what's the status of grid interactive buildings today?
Yeah, obviously I don't know about every project going on throughout the country, but I would say, one word that is probably a good descriptor is nascent. There's a lot of talk about grid interactive buildings. I mean, I've talked to a number of different entities, and they're familiar with it and monitoring it, but not a ton of action. I do know, in that DOE roadmap you mentioned, Jeff, that one of the tenets or the pillars of that roadmap was for the government, federal government, to lead by example. Mm-hmm. And the GSA, has some mandates to incorporate GEB technologies into, any of their future buildings. I think they're piloting GEB technologies right now in a number of their buildings through their Green Proving Grounds program.
Is it in one place or like around the country?
I don't have a ton of details about that, but I think it's maybe 4 different facilities around the country. They're looking at things, different building types, different climate zones. Just
GSA basically manages all the federal buildings.
Right. GSA meaning the General Services Administration. They essentially act as the landlord for many of the federal facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So they're responsible for maintenance and of facilities, energy bills, that type of thing. So they're doing what the DOE is saying they should do, is in as far as leading by example. I know there's some utility pilots out there as well. One I'm familiar with, at least from a distance, I'm just reading filings, is in Long Island. PSEG in Long Island was looking at a residential smart panel type program that I think is able to control some of the different loads in the house and provide feedback. I don't have a ton of details. I'd love to talk to some people there to understand more about that pilot, but I did read the filing, and they had about 4 or 5 pages of description, and it sounded like a really cool program. So that's more on the residential side. On the commercial side, I think we're seeing bits and pieces of GEB technologies and theory being deployed, whether that's through automated demand response type programs like they're running in California. A lot of the aggregators out there are working, demand response aggregators are out there working with their customer base to help them implement demand flexibility, demand management response type strategies that they can deploy based on pricing signals to avoid setting peaks for their facilities. Some of that's a little bit more manual than the true definition of GEBs, but I think that's what we need to do, is kind of take it step by step to get there. But yeah, beyond that, I'm not aware of any other like fully functional demonstration GEB projects. The DOE is now announcing some of the winners of their Connected Communities program, and those are demonstration projects, kind of dispersed all over the country. I think there are half a dozen or a dozen that they've announced thus far. Still don't know a ton about those, but I'm sure there'll be some great learning opportunities from those as well.
Okay. What about some projects that Michael's has done that you've been involved with? That's what we talked about quite a bit with CEPA.
Yeah. So we've done some, I would call them GEB predecessor type projects. Working with an office building, multi-tenant office building. We had some very forward-thinking facility managers and controls contractors there, and we worked with them to essentially program, test out a number of different control sequences to shift load during some peak windows that the utility was concerned with. In this case, it was 2 to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday throughout the whole summer. So we put in place a number of pre-cooling strategies, capping VFD speeds during that 2 to 6 p.m. window, and a couple other things that are escaping me right now. But then we were able to go and analyze what did the building's load shape look like after we enabled those control sequences and did some comparison days for controlled and non-controlled, and quantified what was their average peak reduction during that 2 to 6 p.m. window, throughout the entire summer. The utility, awarded them, an incentive based on the number of kW they were able to shed, and I think that proved successful. We had some great lessons learned there that we were looking forward to applying in future projects. But that was really a good GEB predecessor. Now, were that a true GEB project, I think there'd be that kind of smart supervisory controller that can make all those decisions and take more variable pricing signals from the utility. Mm-hmm. But in this case, the utility didn't have that capability to do so. So we just looked at this fixed window of when we wanted to shed and reduce demand.
So they did get an incentive from for doing that pilot, because I know, because obviously I shouldn't say obviously, I think customers need more than just the energy savings that they're getting from the standard tariffs that they're getting, that they use. They need the pricing. They need more savings than the usual $14 a kW or whatever the rate is.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. So we did offer an incentive through the utility for this pilot project. And the reason being is, we were concerned about a 4-hour peak window that was really when this utility had the most expensive, marginal cost of energy. That's when they wanted to reduce load on their grid and prove concept there. But the problem really was that the utility tariffs peak window, what the customer's peak demand was set at was, a much longer, 8, 10, 12-hour window.
Yeah.
And, shifting load, for a small period of hours in the afternoon is much easier than, shifting load for half the day. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the other thing with grid interactive buildings that I always need to remember too is it's not really demand response, because demand response normally has limited number of hours, limited number of events per year, and grid interactive buildings is meant to be something you use like practically every day,
continuous, I would say,
or a lot. So that's what makes it a lot more complicated, I think, than demand response.
Yeah.
And so you need that feedback or pricing signal on a daily basis. It's just on an ongoing basis, not just a few events per year.
Right.
For large CNI.
Yeah. To use GEBs, grid interactive buildings, to their full potential, that's absolutely true. I think they could be a rather complex solution to a demand response type program. Mm-hmm. Could be a good grounds to prove concepts and figure out in the interim before those real-time pricing signals are available.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think are some of the things that need to happen to get the at least the commercial and industrial grid interactive building movement off the sandbar? What do we need to get this moving?
Yeah, there's there's no shortage of sandbars to get off of here, I think. One that you alluded to earlier, Jeff, is the value proposition for the customer, right? There needs to be something that makes this worth their while to pursue, because otherwise it's complexity for the sake of complexity. So some sort of pricing signal, provided by the utility to make it worth the while of a customer to deploy this type of technology. Now, there could be other reasons that a customer might pursue GEBs, and I think you have that in one of your questions we'll address here in a little while. But so one is certainly the pricing incentive for pursuing GEBs. Another thing is the technology. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about all the technologies there and how do they communicate with each other, and what is the language they're all going to talk to each other within the building, and then out to the grid. What type of signal are they going to receive there? Is it something as simple as an email? I mean, I imagine this is an area that I'm certainly not an expert, but I imagine there'd be something more sophisticated than just email signals like a demand response program may operate with right now.
So it's like we need a phone app, like I'll shed this or I'll cut that back. Like in real time, it's in your pocket that the customer needs.
Right.
It's that sort of a thing.
Yep.
With a map of your building on it, and you just start tapping the zones of to change the temperature or whatever.
Right. Just shutting down.
Shut the lights off.
Yep.
Go to the lighting.
Yep. Thinking about this a little bit more too. I think we need some leading by example, which I mentioned before. So there has to be the long-term pricing signal to get customers to move forward with this, but also there's this upfront cost to implement this, and some utility support and incentives, and I guess leadership on that realm would be very helpful in my estimation. Utilities can see a lot of value from grid interactive buildings if these things are deployed properly. And then
that was my next question. What's in it for utilities? But go ahead.
Sure. Well, we can get into that a bit more in depth here, but I think they need to provide some leadership, to say, hey, we're encouraging these, and maybe start incentivizing them additionally through new construction programs, or economic development. I don't know. There's a number of different ways they could look at this, but they're going to want to make it valuable for their customers to do so if it's valuable for them. That also kind of ties in with the federal leadership, with the GSA. I mean, we need to get out there and test these technologies more, get some real world test bed locations, proven results. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these property developers aren't going to be so hesitant about, what's this going to do? Am I going to get nothing but occupant complaints? I mean, this needs to be spun so it's value add and improves the value of their business, not that makes it a pain to occupy that building.
Right, or a pain to participate in these. I don't want to call it participate, but live according to this new paradigm.
Right.
An overused word.
For sure.
But yeah, you talked about complexity a little bit ago, and it is very complex because even if you look at just things like energy storage, whether it's ice or thermal storage with phase change materials or batteries or whatever, you got to control that storage so that it's level, so it lasts during the peak that you want it to last, and you want to maximize its value. So just doing the controls. I mean, you mentioned controls. That's a pretty complicated thing, because there are companies who are developing the technologies like the phase change materials to shift load. But the big thing about that is so they've got the material, so which is the phase change material itself. You need to have the structure, whatever that is, something to put in an airstream or something to put in a chilled water stream or something to put in the space, whatever. You need to have that. It's got to have a container. It's got to have the right heat transfer properties, and then you got to control it so that it works when you want it to work. And that's all very complicated.
Oh yeah, 100%.
From an engineer's perspective.
And on top of all that, one thing, all those challenges and sandbars we got to get off. We haven't even addressed the regulation side of things too.
Yeah.
This is an area that I need to do a little bit more research on myself. But not only is there going to be federal regulation, things like for 2222 or.
It's 4 numbers.
Yeah.
I can't remember right now.
But which is related to individual assets on the grid acting as DERs, as far as I know. There's going to be that. There's going to be individual state regulations that things are going to have to go through. I know some of the states we're working in right now are thinking about how can they roll in load management into demand, overall demand side management programs, so they can use DSM dollars to help fund some of these types of things, even if they're not strictly energy saving measures. Mm-hmm. in the strictest sense of the word. So there's a lot of that and a lot of collaboration that's going to need to happen between all these parties. The building owners, the utility companies, the regulators, the technology providers. We just got to get everyone at the table talking and solving these issues.
Okay. So why would utilities want to do this? Get into this complication rather than just building stuff?
Well, in the world we're in nowadays, it's everyone's you got to get rid of carbon, right? And that's the right thing to do. That's what we should be doing. But we only have so many options there for steady, reliable, carbon-free generation sources. Unless we come up with all these different nuclear technologies that we can start building again, we're kind of left with hydro, which we're not building much hydro anymore because we got to keep our rivers flowing.
It's not a good option here in the flat country.
No.
Most of the flat country.
So that leaves us with solar and wind, which are very intermittent. I mean, we can't control when the wind's blowing or when the sun's mm-hmm. shining. So until there's massive amounts of utility scale storage, we need to again find a way to match the demand curve to the supply curve as much as possible if we want to maintain reliability like we're used to. And grid interactive buildings and being able to flex those loads, integrate with EV charging and other things like that. I think that's the direction we have to go. Utilities need to go to keep rates low and keep uptime high.
Yeah, there's just a zillion variables. Yesterday, I think I was reading an article about a university article about an optimized grid, and it wasn't all storage. It was actually like one of the other articles I read earlier, which was just over generate, just, dump, it's cheaper, it was cheap. They were explaining that it's less expensive to build extra generation and you just curtail than it is to, build storage for every kWh generated.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's almost like building a model for the, climate change, but, trying to model the the planet and the churning sea and all that stuff. So, all right. Do you have anything else to add, Bryce? Anything else? Any closing? Anything?
The only other thing I was thinking about here is what other value propositions can we tie into GEBs for building owners? I mean, can we look at, and there's going to be all kinds of ideas and things that pop up with these new, machine learning, AI type building controls, but, can we do things that provide more benefit to building occupants and owners in terms of comfort and
Like
indoor air
non-energy
quality?
benefits.
Yeah, non-energy benefits. I didn't really want to use that word because, those might be larger drivers for some of these projects than the energy benefits. That may be really what the path to scale looks like for something like this is.
Absolutely.
There's these controllers that do things for,
You need to.
outside of energy, but the energy stuff comes along for the ride.
It's kind of like, who cares about the energy savings and maybe to the customer, that's probably, that might be their value prop there.
Right.
To, the non-energy stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
Selling point.
exactly.
Then you got it.
The facility managers are going to care, and the accountants probably care about the energy spend, but 90% of your building occupants don't care.
Well, they mainly want to be comfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. That's awesome. Thanks.
You bet.
Thanks, Bryce.
You bet. Thanks, Jeff.
Yep.